Hello, everybody. I live in Mount Joy. For those of you who don't know me, I want to show you a little bit of the basics of doing spirals to your pieces. I am by no means an expert at it, and there are multiple ways of doing it. I'm just going to show you my way of doing it and what I've been learning as I've been doing it. This is an example of an open spiral where the spirals go all the way through the piece, and they're pretty uniform. This is an example of another open spiral, but the spirals are a little more tighter than this one. You can kind of see the difference in them a little bit. And a hollow form, which is spiral all the way around. And another hollow form, which is a little bit of a tighter spiral. All these pieces are prototypes, so if you look at them, they are not perfect. So bear with me on that. And then I make these little things called weed pots, and I'm supposed to give them a different name. So they are dried flower vases with spirals around. And this is an example of kind of how I'm going to show you how to do. These are really simple things to get started with to do spirals. And then the last spiral piece I just got done with is this one. This is a bowl that has a spiral that's not only open, but it's also open on the top. And when you were talking about flexibility, you have to be really careful because these things will snap off if you press them too hard. And if you look really closely, you will see some epoxy on where they did snap off. And I have to glue them back together. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the basics.
Leave it right there.
Oh, you can pick it up
right
over there? Okay.
Yeah.
Dave, what kind of wood is that open top?
This one?
Yeah.
This is a piece of cherry.
Okay.
I've been experimenting with different types of wood too to find out what woods are better for this than others. So cherry works really well. So what I want to explain is how I go about putting spirals on the pieces. So this is a piece of unknown wood. Not really quite sure what it is. And this is one of my dried flower vases. So I go ahead and make the random shape of it. I drill a hole in the top. And then one of the things you must have to really do this well is one of these flat bottom tool rests. It just makes it a little bit easier because what you need to do is draw a series of lines on your pieces to make the spiral. So if I go over to the board here, you have to draw two sets of lines for spirals to make them uniform. So the first set of lines you're going to draw are going to be your horizontal lines going around the piece. And based on the shape of the piece, they will or will not be parallel to each other. It all depends on what your piece is. And these pieces that slope, they are not going to be parallel. So your spirals will be wider here and thinner down here, or further apart here and closer here. If you wanted them uniform, if you take a look at these pieces over here as an example, sorry, I move around a lot. Since this piece is more uniform in shape, these spirals are more uniform in size. When you take a look at something like this, where it's thicker at the bottom and thinner at the top, the spirals here are a little bit wider, and as they get closer to the top, they get a little bit thinner. And the same thing with the bowls. You can make them have different sizes based on how you shape them on the bowls or the other pieces as well. But for this example, for the dried flower pots, these lines will not be parallel. So that's one set of lines you draw, and they go all the way around your piece. When I'm using my lathe, this doesn't have an index pin, so I can't really show you, but I have a jet lathe, and on my index, there's 12 index points. So I just put my pin in.
Or a switch.
There you go. So I put my pin in, and then I take a flat carpenter's pencil on a flat tool rest, and then I just draw the line all the way down the side. And then I go to the next spot and I do the same thing all the way around. So I will start with anywhere from, an even number. So like if I want to do, since I have a 12, I could do 2 lines, 3 lines, 4 lines, 6 lines, or 12 lines, or 8 lines if I wanted to. And I just start off with doing 12 lines. That way it puts all the way around my piece. The next thing you want to do is draw the other set of lines, which are the vertical lines on your piece this way. And then you could draw these at even distances all the way across your piece if you want uniform spirals that have the same kind of slope, or you can draw them thinner here or closer together here, further away back here, or closer here, further away. It really doesn't matter. And it's something to experiment with to find out what you like. I happen to like things very uniform. So once I have my vertical and horizontal lines, you're actually creating a grid across the piece. And then the next thing to do would be to draw your spirals in. And what I do is I just draw from corner to corner. So I'll draw, and then that'll go all the way around the piece, and it may come back here. And then you might get like one on the end there. And that will be one spiral going around the whole entire piece. And then you can go to the next line, or you could skip that and go to the next one. Since I'm doing 12 points as my lines, because I have a 12 index wheel, I want to do it and skip every one, skip every 2, skip every 3. But I want to have an even number of spirals going around my piece. So if you have a 16 index wheel, you could do every 2, every 4, every 8, but you can't do every 3 because then it won't be even, because 3 is not a multiple of 16. So in this case, what I'm doing is I'll skip one, and then I'll go around, and then it'll come up over here, and then it may come up over here again. And then what you'll end up creating is a pattern for you to know where to carve on your piece to get your spiral. And when you're doing a bowl, it will be the same thing. You would create your lines going around the bowl. And then you would create these lines going up. And then again, you would just connect them. And then based on how many you wanted across your bowl would depend on how many spirals you put in. Now, if you want to make an open spiral, what you would do then is you would measure equal distance from that line, and then you would kind of draw in where you would put your open spiral. But make sure that you have equal distance on either line, or like go half an inch on each side, but not on both sides, as long as you're consistent with it. And then you would draw your open spirals. And that's up to you if you want to make open spirals or closed spirals. It's something you just practice with and find out what you like. I've experimented with both. And when I'm doing things like this, I wouldn't want to do an open spiral because I don't hollow this whole thing out. I just take a drill and go all the way, maybe down to about here. So if I'm going to do an open pierced spiral, this is going to be really, really thick as compared to really, really thin up here. So in this piece, I have all the parallel lines already drawn. And just to show you what I'm going to do, I don't have my tape measure here, but I could just hold my pencil here and just go around and just estimate maybe half an inch. I've done enough of these to kind of guess. So then what I'll do is I'll just start drawing in my spirals. So I'll start here. And it doesn't have to be perfect because as you're carving, you're probably going to make adjustments to it as the wood reacts to being carved.
But Dave, did you intentionally, it appears to be like you increased the spacing of the circumferential lines. Is that intentional because of the changing diameter and how you want to?
I just kind of winged it.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, that's the nice thing about this is you can play with it and kind of do whatever you want. And it really doesn't matter because they could all look different. If you want to keep them uniform, I could get a tape measure out and I can actually measure every half an inch and do it. And that's how I would usually do it. But for tonight, since I didn't bring a tape measure,
You want to tape it? I got one here.
I'm good. And then what I'll do is I will do it every, so I'll have a lot of spirals going around this one as an example.
You skip, you went from going across a single square to a double square. Does that make a difference?
Oh yeah, that is a line there. Yeah, sorry.
First, yeah, the first.
Yeah, I didn't see that first line.
You can do that. You just get tighter spirals at
Yeah.
the top.
That's it.
I just-
If I had an eraser, I'd erase it, but.
okay.
So it's probably got a
Casual
razor.
idea. I
We got
the
sandpaper.
over there.
Sand it off.
So as you can see, as you're doing this, you're going around the whole entire piece. And it does get a little confusing when you mess up. But.
He puts his arm in a jig and
Now, when I'm doing flower pots like this or flower vases, a lot of people think that when you start to carve out, you follow the line. But in this case, what you're doing is that line is the peak of where your spiral is. So what you're doing instead is when you're carving, in this instance, if you can see it, you're taking this wood away right here. So all of this is going to go away. And then that pencil line right there is what causes so that pencil line right there is this line right here going all the way across. Because the first time I did this, I got confused. And when I did it, I was doing someone asked me to do a magic wand with a spiral around it. And then I used the lines as where to carve. And then I had all these gullies in it and it was a reverse spiral and I didn't really like it as much. So then I realized that the black lines is what you keep and then you go in between. That's the nice thing about practice. So again, you can make these spirals as big or as small as you want. You can make them as shallow or as deep as you want. And you'll see that if you look at this, they're a lot more shallow here, and then they get deeper as they go down on this piece. That's just my style. You can do it any way you want. So once you have all this going the whole way around the piece, what you'll end up with what you'll end up with is something like this. So this is one where I didn't mess up. These are all the lines that I'm going to keep in the piece. And then what I did on this piece is I carved and hollowed the top of this. So I'm going to have a combination of one of these and then a combination of one of those. So I wanted to press and see what I could do with it. So here I have the inside, which is all going to be gone. And then I have a note here where the hollowing kind of starts. And then I'm going to start making, here you'll have your black line. And then here you have the distance between them, forming the shape of the spiral that's left. I don't know how this is going to turn out. This could end up being crap. I don't know. But you have to experiment with it and kind of see what you want. This was something that came to me in a dream. So we'll see how this goes. I would recommend hollowing everything out before you do any spiraling. The piece right here in the center, I was able to put back on the lathe and then hollow it out even more once it was completed. But it's a pretty thick piece, probably half an inch thick. So on the thinner pieces, you would just shatter it if you caught something and it would ruin it. So make sure you get your hollowing as thin as you want if you're going to do any kind of pierced open hollowing. Once you have a piece done like this, what I do is I use saber-tooth bits. So I don't know if anyone has ever used saber-tooth bits. I'm sure a lot of you probably have them. They come in different shapes and flavors. I have a lot of them. You can see them all. Saber-tooth makes orange ones, green ones, yellow ones, white ones. They're always coming out with different kinds of bits. And you want to be careful on which ones you decide to use based on the wood that you're using and how thin or thick your piece is. There was a comment when you were doing your demo about, do the bits ever travel? They do. So if you're using the saber-tooth orange bits, these are the most aggressive bits. You can take out a lot of wood really quick, but then you can also screw up your piece really quick too. So you have to be very, very careful when you're doing it. And I would practice using saber-tooth bits on a solid piece of wood just to understand how they cut, the direction they cut, and how much pressure you have to use. Oh, sure.
Overhead.
Yeah, Mike, you must. Okay, there we're good.
Oh, there we go.
We zoomed in a little bit so we could see.
Oh, okay.
No, just see, you can see what you're doing there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as an example, the orange bits here are the most aggressive, and they will take a lot of wood out. In this case, because this piece is a little punky and it's spalted, I would probably not start with the orange bits because I think it would be too aggressive. I'd probably end up starting with the green bits, which are the next less aggressive, and then move to the yellow, and then the white are their whisper bits, which are like the fine, fine grit. And then I would still go through and sand it all with sandpaper when I'm done. And they have different shapes. You can experiment with which bits work best for you. When I'm doing a lot of roughing out, when I'm doing this wide roughing, I usually start with a circle bit, and then I'll go down to maybe one of the cylindrical bits and end up with one of these cone-shaped bits. And then maybe at the very end using one of the thin cone or thin cylindricals to get the sides to kind of help sand them out.
What kind of motor are you using? Like a
So I use a Dremel. So I use a Dremel. It works for me. I don't want to go too fast because the bits can go really quick. So if you snag something, I've already had a bit start here and then I hit something and went right all the way down, and it just kind of ruined the piece. So I had to start over. Better put those over there so I don't lose them. What I also do is when I do this, I do all my carving on the lathe, and I use an index pin. So I use the index pin to hold the piece there, and then I'll hold my Dremel with two hands. So what I'll do is move this out of the way, and then I'll have one hand kind of resting on the piece, and then the other hand here, slowly carving the piece. And I will only do a little section at a time, and I'll do like this section, and this section, and then I'll spin the piece, and I'll do a little bit more of that section. And then if I'm doing a piece like this, you could just go right down the line and just kind of follow it. When I'm doing an open piece, I might do a little bit of the open pieces in bits and pieces because I want to test the wood to see how strong the wood is. I don't want to carve a whole piece and then find out that when I go to carve the next piece next to it, the wood between it's going to snap. So I'll test it and just do like the opening across the tops, and then I'll start going down the whole entire piece. And when you're doing something like this, where it's all open, when you're doing a piece like this, when I carve it, I will carve and then leave wood halfway the whole way around to stabilize it. And then I'll carve the bottom, and then I'll slowly go back and take each one of these out very, very slowly. Because if you do one and then try and do the other one, these are so flexible. When you're carving it, it'll just snap off.
You also just leave the top rim uncarved.
I could,
Finish it at the end.
yeah. But what I did this one is I just kept the ones in the middle. Because I had some pieces here where the top, this piece actually snapped off the top. So I'm like, well, instead of keeping the tops, I'll just keep the middle. And you just kind of have to experiment with it. As you're doing, you'll come up with your own way of doing it. Nothing right is nothing wrong. It's just the way you do it, you know.
What's the that bowl?
What?
What's the thickness of that bowl?
The
Your hand?
thickness of this bowl, all the prototypes I have vary in thickness because I wanted to experiment to see how thin I could go and how thick I could go. So in this case, it's really thin down near the bottom, and then it's thicker at the top. But I wanted to find out what is the thickness that would work for this kind of piece. So instead of making 7 of these, I just made one with different thicknesses on it. And then I could figure out what thickness I'm going to do for the next one I do. So this kind of piece works better, a little bit thicker than thinner. So I would say if you're doing a piece like this, again, this is cherry, walnut will be a little bit different, maple will be a little bit different. 1/4 of an inch would be a good thickness to keep it from being too flexible. A piece like this, as I was doing this one, this is really thick. This was one of the first ones I did because I was afraid. Because I didn't know how to do it, and I was afraid it was going to shatter on me. This is probably a good 1/2 inch thick. So it took a lot of time to carve with the Dremels, but it's very secure. It's very solid. It doesn't move. I can pick this up and swing it, and I'm not worried about it. So for this piece, I could probably go down to 1/4 of an inch, as long as it's consistent the whole way through. I also experimented on this one as to how thick and thin I could make the spirals. That's why these are all prototypes. So here there's a thin part of the spiral, and then these are a little bit thicker. And this one is even a little bit thicker than the other one. Just experimenting with, if I'm going to do this again, how thin can I take the wood before it will snap? Because I don't want to glue a lot of it together. But until you do this, you don't really know what you're going to experiment with, just like piercing. You know, it's like, how thin can I make the piercing before it snaps and you ruin it? So it also depends on the wood. So this is a piece of spalted maple, and I thought it was going to be a little more punky than it was, but it really held together really well. And then the bigger you get, I have a hard time finding wood that does not crack. I'll tell you that. So the bigger you get, the more cracks you're going to end up having. So in this example, I knew there was a crack right here, and that crack carried the whole way through. So I ended up epoxying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of these together. This one's epoxied twice, and that's just because of the natural cracks in the wood. And this is a piece of cherry. And there's another crack here, there's another crack here. So this one took a lot longer than the other ones. But unless you know those cracks are there, you might not even notice that they were mistakes. And people who buy it certainly don't know their mistakes, so you don't tell them they're mistakes. And this is another piece of cherry. And you could tell there's a crack right here. another crack. So this piece fell out as I was doing it. There was another big crack. Oh, there's another crack here, another crack here. So there's a lot of two-part epoxy in here too, where you do a little bit of carving, you let it set overnight, come back and do it the next day, and just kind of sand it out. But people love these things, I'll tell you. Whenever I put them out at shows, I get orders for them all the time. I just can't make them fast enough because they take a long time to make. This takes about 4 hours. I'd say 3 of those hours are carving and sanding. But again, this is a thicker piece too. So if I made this a little bit thinner, it might not take as long. These things don't really take that much time at all. You could probably do these in an hour and a half. And the more you do it, the faster you'll get at it. You'll realize you don't have to be as exact doing this, because as you're carving, you can actually control that line that you want to put there. So once you start it, you can kind of just make that line be whatever you want, as high or as thin as you want. I will also tell you that these are really solid pieces if you want to do it. This again is a prototype, and it's really, really thin down here. This is probably 1/8 of an inch in this section because I'm really bad at hollowing. And that wasn't on purpose, that was a mistake. But up here it's a lot thicker. And these pieces with the rim are actually very, very solid. You know, they don't move around as much as you think they might move around. I would recommend, if you're going to be doing something like this, make sure you have a really good face mask. This creates a lot of dust. And I'm talking a lot of dust because you're actually carving and sanding all the wood away. So I like these masks because they fit over your face, they latch on your ear, and they have a little Velcro on the back. So if you have glasses on, you actually don't steam your glasses up. And they have these little vents here that let you exhale. So all your exhale goes out. They're really cool. They block everything.
So Dave, what is that mask?
This is a mask by a company called BC Mask Base Camp. They sent me a couple to experiment with, and I did a product review, and they sent me like 8 of them. And I've been using the same one for a little bit and just replacing the inserts, and they work really, really well. They're really comfortable. And in the winter, it keeps your face warm. And they have a nose piece here that's very flexible. Not a product endorsement or anything, but just I like the quality of them. And there's other companies that make things similar to this, but they also make a clip that you can put over your head if the ear things aren't tight enough to get it even tighter. But I like it because it's Velcro. It's really easy to get on and off, and it really blocks the sand. So I like those. Let's see what else I could tell you. You will break a lot. When you're first starting it, I would recommend, if you're going to start with something like this, because you really can't mess this up. Even if you mess up, if you go too deep, just go deep the whole way around. But what's nice about this is, even if your peaks are too high, you could just kind of grind them off or sand them off and just reshape them. And you have enough wood to play with, where you're not going to really ruin anything. But it's a great way to experiment with doing the spirals. If you're going to use a Dremel, to play with the different kinds of bits to see how they carry on the wood, and to test your different kinds of wood and find out what wood you like to use. I've done walnut, cherry, maple, elm. This is Kentucky coffee tree. I've done holly. Those are all the woods I've tried so far, and every one seems to be working really, really well. So I didn't want to do a full demo because of the dust that it generates. It's a lot of dust, but I just wanted to kind of show you guys the basics of doing it. I could show you what it looks like when you do a bowl, when you're drawing your bowl.
Yeah, have you ever done the soft wood where you get the sharp, cut seed, and it pulls your cutter on the winter versus summer growth?
No, I haven't tried any softer woods. I do all the hardwoods. So
Hey, Dave, you ought to point out that those bits last forever.
Oh, they do.
And if they clog up, just throw a blowtorch on them. We'll clean them right off.
Yeah, I've been using these saber-tooth bits over 2 or 3 years, and they're still as sharp as they were when I
Yeah.
first got them. The paint does come off, so you kind of have to know, like by the size of the grit, what they are. But I just kind of put them in my little, I have little drawers I put them in. And saber-tooth is really cool. If you have Instagram, or same with water locks, I've had my pieces featured on the water locks and saber-tooth Instagram and Facebook accounts. So if you tag them in your pieces saying that you're using their products, they'll share them. It's really cool. So this is an example of a bowl, just to show you how you would mark a bowl. So we'll pretend this is an index. You just go around, say it goes to there. Now these will not be uniform because I don't have the pin.
Switching views so you can see the different ways of doing it.
And if you mess up your lines, you just put the lathe on and sand them off. That's a nice thing. Well, these are pretty uniform. And then again, you would just draw your circles, draw your other lines in here. And then again, let's say you don't want to start at the very bottom, just start here and draw your spiral. And let's say you only want to skip one, then you skip one. Hopefully I drew an even amount of lines. I should have counted that. Oh, look at that, I did. 50-50 chance. So you can keep this as a closed spiral and just kind of carve out this area in here. And if you wanted to, you can kind of just say this is your center and just kind of hand draw or use a protractor or whatever you want to use to round it out. And then just kind of, hand put in where you want your curve to start and stop. Or if you want to do an open spiral, just say, I'm going to go maybe this far on this side. And then this far on this side. And then down here, just kind of round it out. And then up here, do the same thing. And then this is the area that you would remove. And then the more lines you put in, the more you can vary your spiral. Now, all my spirals go the same direction because I'm right-handed. If I was left-handed, they would probably go this way instead. You can draw them left-handed. You don't have to draw them all the same, but if you look, all my spirals are the same direction. That's just what I got stuck into.
Northern hemisphere,
Yeah.
they're different in the southern.
Or if you start on the inside of the bowl and you're some to the outside.
Yeah, either way.
You can go back to the other.
You could draw them on the inside and do it that way. And then again, you would just do the next one going across too. And then if you don't like it, sand it off and then just redo it. Or use a different color pencil. What I usually end up doing is once I have my lines, I will bring an eraser in and erase the lines I'm not using, just so it doesn't confuse me. Because when you're dealing with a piece like this, where you have all these different lines, I will go back and erase the lines that I'm not using, because it will get confusing up on the top when I go from doing one of these spirals to one of those spirals because I'm changing how I'm carving out. So if you follow me on Instagram, you'll be able to see this, or I can bring it in when I'm done, if it survives. And then just to show you what it would look like if you took one of these and wanted to do an even tighter spiral. I'm just going to draw a couple of lines on here to show you. So the closer you put your lines, the more boxes you have to connect. So you can really change how tight you want to make your spirals. So now that we have more lines, we can even go back and add another line in the middle. So now we have all these lines in a grid, and you can make a really, really tight spiral.
Can I say that these are actually helixes?
Helixes, spirals, I call them spirals.
Barry will have to give you another term for this.
What's the difference, John?
He says he.
Spirals are flat, helixes are three-dimensional.
So as you're doing this, you can actually make them really tight, and then you can carve in between here, and then you get really tight little lines going all the way around. I have a piece of cedar that I have where the lines are really, really tight. I had to carve it with this little bit because that's how wide the gullies were. And it was a really, really tight helix around the whole entire thing. And it looks really cool. But I couldn't sand it. It just drove me crazy. So the nice thing is with these bits, you might not have to sand as much if you do get the fine tooth whisper bits. And I Cut Saw makes these things too. They call them something different, but saber tooth I really like. And you would just have to maybe finish up with 220 grit and or 320 grit, depending on how well you can handle it.
That's one thing that people who haven't used Cutsall or saber tooth might not know is they're not sanding tools. They're literally ripping the wood out. So if you use the orange one,
Oh yeah,
like you're using 30 sandpaper, you got to get down to the white one before you could sand it, maybe even 180.
oh yeah.
Otherwise you're going through, because they just tear the wood. They're just literally claws, like a bear just scraping up the wood. So.
And it also depends on what kind of wood you're using. Like walnut will rip a lot easier than cherry. Kentucky coffee tree finishes really, really well. It really like almost hand polishes just with sandpaper. So it really depends on how hard your wood is and how aggressive you are. But yeah, I mean, experiment with flat pieces of wood to kind of see how the bits work before you just dive into this.
Let's see if we got any questions out in the Zoom land. Any of you guys out in Zoom land? Questions?
Yes, I do have a question. This begs to have a jig instead of hand holding it.
Barry has a jig, but my only problem with the jig is it kind of limits your creativity. So if I wanted to take this helix and go this way and then come back this way and go like in a C shape or an S shape, I think it would be a lot harder to create a jig And it may take a lot more time creating a jig than it does to actually just do the piece. I don't know, Barry, you could tell me whether that's right or wrong. But in my head, I would rather do it by hand than use a jig.
I can see
Very
lots
good.
of mistakes.
I would not attempt reversing the direction mid-travel. We can go in either direction, but I've only ever done start to finish.
Yeah. And I kind of like doing it by hand. It's peaceful. And even though it takes a long time, since you're carving and you're lathing by hand, I just think it's better if you carve it by hand as well. But that's just me. So you can certainly, if you have a jig, you can certainly use one to do it.
Well, the one thing is the jig doesn't allow the cutter to jump. Your hand would allow it to go the wrong way at the wrong time, right?
I would assume that would be the case if your jig's made properly. Yeah.
That's an
Well,
ornament,
Barry
that's
made
an
it, it's
ornamental lathe.
definitely proper.
That's an ornamental lathe will do that.
It's a Rose engine.
Have you ever used like a half round rasp on those? I would think since they're mostly straight lines, that would make it easier to remove.
For something this wide, I did try using a half round rasp and other tools. I just couldn't get the angle right for what I was looking for when I was doing it. So based on what I was looking for, these tools work better for what I wanted my finish to be. But if you had the right size tool to do it, that could work as well. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways of doing it, but this is just the way I like to do it.
Thank you.
Did you ever do a progressive taper? Seems like something that's tapered or thinner at the top. If you did a progressive taper, you know what I mean?
Yeah, when you do pieces like this where it's thinner at the top, your spiral or your helix is, I'm gonna call them spirals anyway. Your spiral tips do come closer at the very top than they do at the bottom. This isn't a good example of it, but you can see that the distance between these gullies and mountains is much
Yeah.
wider at the bottom than it is at the top.
Oh, so it's automatically kind of happening, yeah.
So based on the slope of your,
Interesting.
yeah, based on the slope of your piece, those gullies will conform to the size of your piece.
Okay.
All your pieces have straight sides. What if they have a concave, like you cut sometimes for vessels, you know, make them a rounded edge? Would that work as well?
Yeah, I could show you on the board. What will happen is if you have a piece that is like this and then this,
Yes.
as you're doing your lines will automatically come down. And then as you're going like this, you're going to find that your spiral will come in, but then get really tight and then and open up again over here. So this area here, you might have really, really tight spirals put together. So depending on what you're doing, you may end up taking the tips of these off as you're trying to finish them, depending on how close your tips are to each other. So these tips here, you'll end up taking them off in that really, really tight area. So you could bring all your spirals together, fade them into the center, and then fade them back out, going out to the top and keeping your center nice and even. That's one way of doing it. I could experiment with it and find out what happens.
Yeah, it's basically taking that thing and inverting one on top of it. It's the same effect, right?
Well, what will happen is as you go into your convex piece or concave piece, whichever it is, you're going to go down to a tighter radius here. So all these the valleys and the mountaintops will converge into a thinner piece. And then they'll have to get larger as you go back out to the size of this.
And the other option that would be fun would be to make the valley less and less deep, if I can use that word, as you get toward the center, and have like a smooth center, and then they start building up again, like they came out of the valley to the mountains, right?
Yeah.
Sounds like you should try that.
There you go, Jim. Try it yourself. Show us how it's done.
Build a jig.
No way.
Yeah, you can build a jig with it.
Maybe I'll borrow Barry's jig, but he's got to be able to vary the depth. I'm a woodturner because I want it done now, not a week later. So,
Jim, you've got a tape measure there on you, so there you go.
The last thing I would wear on suspenders is the tape measure. Oh, no, how huge.
Great stuff, Dave.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks. Sorry it wasn't like more doing it, but there's so much dust when you do it. I wouldn't. You guys would be coughing
Hey,
like crazy.
Dave, you graduate one longitudinal line at a time, right? So you go one by one. But if you went
You could
one
skip
by
them.
two, you can really shrink,
Yeah.
right? You can tighten up the spiral.
Yeah, the nice thing is if you draw the lines, you can connect them any way you want as long as you're consistent, because that'll give you a uniform look the whole way around. And you can skip a line, you can jump a line as long as you're consistent. And that's why if you do it, you can always just sand it off and start it over and come up with a new pattern based on what you want to do.
So if you skip like that, the spiral will get tighter at the top.
It'll get
Get
flatter.
wider. If
It'll
you
get
skip,
Oh,
if you skip going around, it'll get wider. If you skip going this way, it'll get tighter.
But it'll also get flatter.
Right.
If you skip going this way, it gets much flatter. So there's more helixes around the piece. So
Yeah. And the best thing to do is just experiment with it and come up with a system that you like. You know, I like to do it on my jet. I do all 12, then I do 1/2 inches, and I connect them corner to corner, and I get a pretty uniform kind of look. Yep.
cool.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.